Welcome to State of the State, the monthly roundup of policy and research for the state of Michigan, brought to you by the Institute of Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University and our friends here at WKAR Studios. I'm Arnold Weinfeld, Associate Director for the Institute. Today I'm joined by economist Dr. Charlie Ballard. Later on, we'll be joined by our guest, Dr. Johannes Bauer, Director of the Coelho Center at Michigan State University, to discuss an exciting project to increase access to high-speed broadband across the state of Michigan. Very important for our economy and education. So I'm interested to hear that. But Charlie, we've been gone a little bit. I hope you had a good summer.
Yes.
Because it's over, you know.
Things are changing. Days are getting shorter.
The days are getting shorter, yes, indeed. But let's stick to the economy because there's been a lot going on in the American economy. Fears of inflation, fears of recession, I should say. Yet, people are finding work. Incomes are going up. Granted, it's being eaten by inflation. Federal Reserve Board's been taking some actions to slow it down. It's all a very delicate balance. Where are we?
It is indeed. I want to begin with what you said, fears of recession, because the first 2 quarters of this year, the Commerce Department measurement says that real gross domestic product fell 2 consecutive quarters. Some people use a very crude, rough rule of thumb and say that that's a recession. That's too simplistic. I will say now we are not in a recession because to figure out where the economy is, you want to look at more than one measure. And also, the GDP numbers only come out once a quarter. We've got a lot of data series that are monthly, so that gives us more ability to analyze things. So the biggest one that says we're not in a recession is employment. Non-farm payroll employment has been increasing steadily at more than 300,000 jobs per month nationally. And this last month, it grew at more than 500,000 jobs per month. The group that is kind of the gold standard for determining whether we're in a recession is a committee that's convened by the National Bureau of Economic Research, a private think tank. And they look at half a dozen indicators. They look at industrial production, which is up this year. They look at real consumer spending, which is up this year. They look at payroll employment, which is up this year. So the economy is not now in a recession. Why did GDP fall? Well, many components of GDP actually rose, but early in the year, there was an inventory adjustment that made things look bad, and also business investment is down a little bit. But most indicators are still positive. So we're not in a recession now. Then the next question is, will we be in a recession 6 to 9 months from now? And that's a question to which I do not have a good answer.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody does, right?
No. So what happened is we have developed inflation, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But when there's inflation, the Federal Reserve is required by law to try to establish relatively stable prices. And so they see an overheated economy with inflation, and it's their job to try to take some of the steam out of it. And unfortunately, they only have a limited number of tools. They can raise certain interest rates that they have control over. They can do other things to restrict credit. But theirs is a blunt tool. And their job is to try to take the steam out of the economy just enough to slow down inflation without tipping the economy into recession. That is not easy. Mm-hmm. That is, as you say, a delicate balance. We know historically the last big inflation that we had in the 70s, in 1979, the Fed said, we're going to put on the brakes. We're going to squeeze out inflation. They succeeded at squeezing out inflation, but we got a pretty deep recession.
They squeezed everything else.
They did a lot of squeezing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and there's in terms of inflation, I note that last month inflation was 0%.
Right. So they have perhaps succeeded in taking some of the steam out of it. The biggest thing for last month, no inflation, is that energy prices are down. I filled up my tank the day before yesterday, and the price was more than $1 less than it was in June. So,
well, gas prices are down, but I saw something the other day where natural gas futures are skyrocketing right now.
well, the natural gas market has been jolted by the Russians, who are trying to do everything they can to resolve the mistake they made by going into Ukraine, and they're restricting supplies of. They're a big natural gas producer, and they're restricting the supplies of natural gas to Europe in the hopes that the European countries will fold. I actually don't think that's going to happen. You've got a dozen countries that joined NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union, and why did they do that? They didn't have to. They did it because they were afraid of Russia. Mm-hmm. And if there was anything to convince you that you should be afraid of Russia, it happened.
So inflation is real. That's true.
Yes.
But I was reading something the other day where recession is also impacted by consumer attitudes, and recession is a bit of a state of mind, isn't it?
Oh, it is. So much of economics is psychology. If people are optimistic, they tend to spend more money. If they're pessimistic, they tend to retrench. And so that's one of the indicators that we have to continue to look at. And there are a lot of people who are kind of grumpy and kind of gloomy, and that could contribute to recession. As I say, we're not in a recession now, but it could happen, especially if the Federal Reserve's contractionary policies bite more.
And I have a theory, I think it's true, that politics plays a role in that as well. We have midterm elections coming up in November. The party in power in Congress, the Democrats, are going to be blamed for every mistake, everything wrong, everything bad that's going on right now. And so we have other politicians that are using this moment of high inflation to stoke fear. And so that's playing a role as well.
No doubt. Now, whether that strategy will work, I'm not sure. That is a very standard strategy. It's always true that the party out of power blames the party in power for everything, including dental implants and crabgrass. We'll see. There are a lot of cross currents in this election. Historically, you would expect the Democrats not to do well. However, the vote on abortion in Kansas suggests that is an issue that does not bode well for Republicans. So we'll see how it goes.
Let's get back to a moment to the inflation,
right?
In inflation issue. I mean, I'm interested to get your perspective on, I know you said you don't know if we're going to be in a recession,
right.
But it seems to me that, part of the inflation issue that we're forgetting about is lingering from COVID, and that's the supply chain issue.
Right.
And so are we going to figure that out? I mean, it's been over 2 years now, and we still can't seem to figure out supply chain.
Well, we've made some real progress. Some of the supply chains that were broken 2.5 years ago have been kind of put back together. But it's an ongoing challenge. Looking back, for me, the surprise is not that we have had inflation this year. It's that we didn't have more inflation in a whole bunch of years in the past 40 years, because the Congresses and the presidents have been, in most years, following what I consider to be irresponsible fiscal policies by running enormous government budget deficits. And on top of all of the deficits that were already there, we had a huge tax cut 5 years ago. And yet that didn't create inflation. And the reason that all of that stimulus didn't create inflation is that the supply chain miraculously kept up. It kept up through in advanced logistical supply chain techniques of tracking with barcodes and all that, exactly what's going on. It kept up with high-speed internet, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about in a little bit. It kept up with fracking. You may or may not like fracking because of the environmental issues, but the United States doubled its output of petroleum. And supply kept up because of this globalization. And we have a whole bunch of things that you can buy at Home Depot there's a component made in Vietnam and a component made in China, and it was assembled somewhere. The problem is that intricate supply chain doesn't work very well when there's a major disruption like COVID.
Worldwide disruption.
Worldwide disruption. And, looking ahead to the future, one thing that has already disrupted the global supply chain this year that has nothing to do with COVID is climate-related disruptions. We've seen several in the United States. If there's a major hurricane on the Gulf Coast, that will have major effects. And right now, we're getting temperatures of 110 degrees in central China, and that also is messing up the supply chain.
It's a small world after all, isn't it?
It is. Well, we made it a very small world in ways that worked fabulously for a few decades, but that don't work so well with some of the problems that we're now encountering.
One of the other factors that has been noted in the argument regarding inflation is the economic stimulus programs that we've had.
That's right.
What impact have they had? Have they added to inflation?
I believe they have. I mentioned the tax cut from 5 years ago, which, since it was passed by a Republican Congress and signed by a Republican president, they don't like to use the word stimulus. They used a different language but it was basically a stimulus, and it stomped on the accelerator. And yet, for the reasons that I just discussed, it didn't create inflation. But then we had the supply chain disruptions of COVID, and then we had massive stimulus. And I think that a lot of that was well-intentioned and probably did some good, but it wasn't targeted sufficiently. We had families with incomes way up around $200,000 who were getting stimulus checks. And if I had been in charge, I would have had it much more narrowly focused on those who were truly needy. That's hard to do because they wanted to get the money out really fast. Mm-hmm. But I think what happened was after all, a year ago, the federal government ran a budget deficit of $3 trillion, unprecedented. What that does is it's putting more money in people's pocket and not taking it out of their pocket through taxes. So people had a ton of money to spend. And during the worst months of COVID, there were only a few things that you could spend on. Historically, the notion of stimulus checks is, hey, honey, look, we got this check from the government. Let's go to Las Vegas. No. 2 years ago, nobody was going to Las Vegas. Mm-hmm.
Nobody was going anywhere.
So there were all these restrictions on what you could spend on. So there was massive demand on exercise bikes and furniture and home improvements. And, that kind of bullwhip whiplash for the economy is just very hard to take without some disruptions. And what we got was strong demand, strangled supply. And that is a formula for inflation.
Very good. Charlie, as always, grateful for your insight and perspectives in having our audience understand what's coming on before it. I'd like to move to Dr. Bauer, who's actually no stranger to our program. He's appeared in the past to discuss groundbreaking research on the impact of lack of broadband access for K-12 students in Michigan. And before I turn it over to Johannes, I'd like to throw some numbers at our audience. Michigan is currently ranked 33rd nationally in the country in terms of broadband connectivity. And here are some others: 47%, 30%, and 23%. These are the percentages of K-12 students in rural, urban, and suburban areas, respectively, that lack access to high-speed internet access. So it is a problem no matter where you live in the state. It was exacerbated by COVID. It certainly showed our gaps. But it's against this backdrop that MSU has now received funding from the federal government to enable open access to broadband services to all Michiganders. Dr. Bauer, welcome back. Tell us about the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here. Just to add a couple more numbers to what just quoted, when the pandemic started, Michigan State University did a survey to understand how our students did in terms of online connectivity and how well they could participate in our online education that we were forced to do. And we found that 16% of our undergraduate students had insufficient access or didn't have the devices necessary to participate in education. And we were actually surprised by it. We thought that number would be much smaller, but it meant that a large share of our student population was not able to really learn and continue to learn under these conditions. And as you pointed out, the state of Michigan also suffers some great discrepancies. There's about a third of Michigan households and citizens currently do not have sufficient connectivity to participate in the economy. Just to come back to Charlie's topic, right? I think it's worthwhile pointing out that the internet scaled very well during the pandemic, right? It held up very well in many ways, and that's a testimony to private investors who had invested in large parts of the infrastructure. But it also did so in a very unequal way, right? It excluded many parts of the population, and whether it's the K through 12 students or our graduate students and undergraduate students, or people who could not participate in the economy or take care of government or healthcare services. And it's about time that we do something to close that gap once and for all. And the Infrastructure Act that was passed last year earmarks a considerable amount of money to close that gap. And actually, overall, it will be sufficient across the nation, to close those digital divides, at least the access divide. There's others that we can maybe discuss in a few moments that will need more investment and more effort over time. But the access divide, we have a chance to close. And the project that you mentioned called Moonlight, which is an acronym, and I should actually read what it stands for.
Of course it's an acronym.
Michigan Open Optical Network Leveraging Innovation to Get High-Speed Technology.
Wow.
Right. So the idea is to if you imagine the internet, this is not an accurate analogy, but it's probably good enough to explain how it works, right? There's on-ramps like in the highway systems, and there's off-ramps. This is essentially the network connection that every individual user has to more powerful, bigger pipes of the network. And then there's the highway system, right, that connects individuals to the servers that they need to access. For example, somebody who lives in the Upper Peninsula might need to tie into a server at Michigan State University to participate in education. These are the servers that help people apply for jobs, government services, healthcare services, and so forth. Some of those are very close to the user. So, for example, Netflix puts its servers very close to users, so you don't need a lot of internet. But most of them actually that are relevant for our current uses of the internet, and especially those that are productive uses that help the economy hum and grow and so forth, and that push innovation, they are not local. And therefore, to have a good sort of well-functioning highway system in place is important. And it turns out that this, what is called the middle mile in internet lingo, that part of the network is a constraint in many states. It has not sufficient capacity to support end users to reach those destinations.
There's not enough lanes, so to speak.
There's
on
not
the
enough
highway.
lanes, right? And so what our project Moonlight does for the state of Michigan is it adds a considerable number of additional lanes to the middle mile network. And that has big ripple effects on the end users, because now the local, what are called internet service providers, whether they are private or public or cooperative nonprofit, they now have an opportunity to connect end users more cheaply and to a higher quality network, right? And that will really enhance their opportunities to provide services. That will lower the prices of providing services to end users, and hopefully be a major contribution to closing those discrepancies that you mentioned.
What's the technology or the infrastructure that's actually going to be put in place to increase those lanes? What can people expect? Are these more towers? Are they boxes on the side of the road? What are we going to see things like that?
Yeah, so that part of the network already has been a fiber optical network for a long time. So fiber optical strands have an uncanny high capacity to carry signals, and technology actually enables us to squeeze more and more information over those fibers. So, for example, the first generation of fiber used only white light, and so you would use lasers to modulate that white light and send it across the networks. They had high capacity, but we learned later on that we could actually use other colors. We could use green and red and blue lights, and multiply. Essentially, the same pipe now could carry 4 times, 10 times as much. And the technology, the electronics to use those fiber optical connections has advanced significantly. And so the current infrastructure was actually, for most part of it, put in place probably 10 to 15 years ago. And it has held up quite well, but now it's time to uplift it, so to speak, right, and increase its capacity. The people will not see very much of it because the fiber that connects locations will not change. Actually, what will change is in 103 locations across the state, the electronics feeding into that fiber system of highways, if you wish, will change and will be much more capable and will provide much more advanced services to the local internet service providers. The funding from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is an agency in the Department of Commerce, is about 40% of the total cost of investment. Michigan State University partnered in this case with Merit Network. Merit Network is a nonprofit research and education network that was established by major research universities in the state and is currently governed and owned by 12 4-year universities in the state. So it connects essentially anchor institutions, libraries, schools, and others across the state, but it also makes its services available in this new model to everybody else, private, public, as I said before. So it will really benefit the whole ecosystem of players in that internet access system.
And by improving the infrastructure in these 103 locations that you noted, Merit will be able to spread their wings, so to speak, across the state and be able to provide greater services to those internet service providers who then can hook up individuals or businesses at the local level.
Yeah, exactly. And we have Michigan State, and our center has a long history of collaborating with Merit. We did studies with them on the use of wireless services, for example, in the access networks, and we did the study that you mentioned about the repercussions of discrepancies in broadband connectivity for the K through 12 our school system, and we have worked for a long time with them to help communities in Michigan map the availability of digital assets and for historical reasons that we could go into, but probably don't need to, the federal maps that exist as to who has access to broadband and who is not were highly inaccurate. We knew from the beginning.
It's a polite way of saying it, Johannes. Thank you.
Yeah, we knew from the beginning that they were inaccurate, and it's one of those things where sort of some pragmatic statistical decisions were made, but the effect was that they overestimated grossly, in many cases by 30 to 50%. The availability of broadband internet infrastructure, right? And unfortunately, subsequent funding programs were tied to those statistics, right? Now you have a gross misallocation of public subsidies, right? Going to the wrong places and not going to places that need it. So we helped for the last 3 years. I think it's now 11 communities, 11 counties, to come up with more accurate maps. But 25% of the Michigan population, I think it's actually quite a significant share, who now have a more accurate inventory as to what are those patches of land where there's no sufficiently high-quality service available, where are those areas that are sufficiently served.
And how does this fold into the new office that the state has created? I believe it's called the My High Speed Broadband Internet Office. I mean, I know Eric Frederick, who's been involved in this as long as any of us as well across the state, is now running that office. What's the relationship there? How will you be collaborating with that office?
Yeah, I'm actually excited about that office. It's very timely. We know from the experience across the country that states who have a designated office to coordinate those many activities, and also the additional federal programs that are currently underway do better than those who don't have such an office. And we offer our services to ERIC as a non-partisan research institution. And in fact, I think the other universities across the state would be happy to help them as well and work with them to really create maybe an evidentiary basis, help them think through sort of some of the challenges to overcome digital divides. Digital divides actually have multiple layers, right? I mean, we commonly think about it in a simplistic way. We think about it as an access divide. You know, somebody who has access and not access, or access and insufficient access. But there's really other layers, right? I mean, access alone doesn't really enable you to use the technology to the benefit of society. And so there's a digital literacy problem, and digital literacy is very unevenly distributed across the population. And it to some degree maps onto access, but not completely, right? There's other issues in play. Even if you have literacy in play, we also need to think about how we design our systems, right? I mean, I can have a financial system that I make accessible through online banking, for example, but we have to really be careful that we design it for all user groups, that it's inclusive, so that people who are differently abled, or people who have visual impairments, or oral impairments, right? I mean, they're sort of able to actually access this. And a lot of our technology currently is designed for very capable, young individuals. And so there's major awareness issues that we need to overcome. We call it human-centric design. And this goes through all the things that we do with digital technology, from healthcare to education, to government services. And there's massive privacy implications, of course. And the fourth level of digital divides is actually that we need to empower people and train people to adapt over time, because as artificial intelligence comes down the pipeline and other technologies, virtual reality, and digital technology becomes more or less black boxed into our lives, right? I mean, it's there. We don't even notice it anymore. Yet it has massive implications for our lives, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to train new qualifications among people. And Michigan State University and other research institutions are well positioned to help in all those things. And I envision it, though, as a co-creation. We don't have just answers that we want to give people, right? I think we are willing to work with people, have a seat at the table, and help solve some of those problems.
Well, as you know, Johannes, and I've been involved in broadband internet access issues for the better part of 2 decades too, going back to my time with the Michigan Municipal League and the rewrite of the Telecommunications Act here in Michigan in 2006. And I'm very excited about this. And as you note, it's important for our economy. It's important for everyone in our state. I'm of the mind that internet access should be considered a public utility, much like electric and telephone were in the 20th century. It is essential for individual and our state prosperity moving forward. So thank you for all you're doing and your partners in this effort. Charlie, any thoughts or questions?
Well, I'm going to go home and get on my computer and use the internet after we're done here. So I do have a question for you, Johannes. Of the people who I know who are either don't have good digital access or are not literate in that, most of them are older. We talked about the geographic divides, but is age a big part of the picture here, or am I overstating that?
Age definitely is a big picture. So it's the factors that are in play here could be age, income, educational attainment, and all this play a role. And there's actually interesting experiences in other countries. So Korea, for a long time, South Korea was a global leader because they had educated their aging population to help them go online and use government and other services. And But they noticed in the past 10 years that because of the technological progress that happened in the meantime, those qualifications are now outdated.
Right.
And they also see sort of this, again, that the age divide resurfaced, right? And that points to that fourth level of digital divide that we need to adapt over time. Let me just close with one other thing that I would like to say. Michigan State University has in its land grant mission, and specifically in our strategic plan, a very strong commitment to equity and inclusion. And so for MSU to be part of this Moonlight project, right, we are sort of the recipient of the grant, but Merit Network essentially carries out all the heavy lifting and Merit funds the remaining 60 part of that major investment in the state. But for MSU, being part of this really helps us realize that land grant mission, and helps us carry forward in a very tangible form and in a very important area of our digital lives, right? This idea to improve inclusion and improve equity. And that goes across age groups, that goes across geographic territories, that goes across educational capabilities. And increasingly, I think we have to think about ways to not only practice this with our traditional students, but I think we will have to be part of a mission to create like a K through 60 educational system that really helps people across the lifespan to upskill and adapt to the power of technology. And it goes both in the direction of making great use of the technology, but also learning how to not act in ways that cause harms. Right? We do know that these are sort of dual-purpose technologies that can be used for great good, but they can also destroy and be very divisive. And some of those effects happen not with malicious intentions, right? But we need to sensitize individuals and all the users to make sure that we truly harness the full benefits of digital technology.
Well, as you note, it is a great opportunity for Michigan State University to continue along with its mission of improving the lives of all of our citizens throughout their lives. Thank you, Johannes. Appreciate your work. Charlie?
Great pleasure.
Any final thoughts?
Well, we still have a little bit of summer. We've still got some beautiful days ahead of us.
It's been a gorgeous week.
It's been great, and so I wish you a good month until we get together for our next podcast.
Super. Thank you, sir. And that's about all the time we have on this edition of State of the State. My thanks again to Russ White and the staff here at WKAR for their support of this program. Join us again next month on State of the State.